Welcome back. We're on video number 7, reading from the Secret Book of John. Where we last left off in video 6, we were uncovering the way in which Sophia had brought about the Demi-urge, who is the god of this realm, the Matrix. So I do encourage you to go back and listen to that video, as it is really important to lay the groundwork for you to understand this video. We're on verse number 14, and recall that Sophia had just created the Demi-urge, and to her surprise, he was a lion-headed serpent. And again, whether you want to think of this as literal or symbolic, as not as important as understanding that what was his characteristics like, as he was very boastful and egotistical, believing he was the god above all gods. He was also ignorant, and he was born out of not only ignorance, but he was cast out of the pleroma by Sophia, the mother, and she shrouded him in luminous cloud, pretty much to maybe hide him. Now, earlier in the last video, I suspected that this was to protect the pleroma, but we're going to find in verse 14, she does actually go into some degree of remorse and repentance for what she perceives to have been a mistake on her behalf. But understand, by the end of it all, she is a vessel by which humankind can rectify themselves and find God. This is everything that she wanted and that the mother father allowed for and blessed. Her counterpart, consort, comes down to quote unquote redeem for humanity and to restore fullness to Sophia and humankind, and to complete the work that she started, that started out empty and unfull. This is how we have to think of this, and not in terms of the orthodox model of shame and guilt and so forth. Now, that does not mean that even perfect beings can't have feelings of jealousy, envy, and so forth, and shame and guilt. Perfection in the eyes of the true Father is merely being able to understand that you were created just the way the Father intended you to be created. It isn't the way you feel. It isn't the way that you think or consider. It is what you actually do and the motivations and intentions behind what you do that defines your character. So we can all have feelings, and this is part of what it means to be human. Even the aeons were moved to have feelings. Even Christ had feelings where he became agitated in the temple when they were selling and making the temple into a money-making scheme, which was not the intention of the church at that time or the temple of that time. That wasn't built for that purpose, and that even agitated Christ to the point that he was moved to overturn tables and so forth and so on. So this says nothing about what makes you a perfect person or an imperfect person. To have emotions is perfectly natural, whether you're an aeon or you're Christ or you're a human being. Trappings that one gets into if you are going to a very strict church that has a set of laws and believes that you have to be a robot, no emotions and no feelings and no passions, no pleasures, no desires. So that's what you have to understand. What makes you perfect is that you are you, and finding that, and the more full you are in terms of completing that person that you are, the full person that you are, the more perfect you are, meaning complete. So there's two ways to use the word perfect. There's a way of using it in the way that God sees us, and that is you were created exactly as was intended. The other way of seeing perfect is you can either be imperfect or perfect, is a way of saying complete or incomplete. That's another way of seeing it. So one is in terms of intrinsic value that can never change in the eyes of the true Father Mother. You're always perfect. You're created just as God intended you. But because you have free will, you can be imperfect from your own self, within your own self, meaning incomplete or not full. So that's why you have to be very careful when you're reading the word perfect in these translations. You have to look at the context of what you're reading. So with that, let's go ahead and start with verse number 14. It says, "And when he saw the creation which surrounded him," and we're referring to the Demi-urge here, "and the multitude of the angels surrounding him, who had came into being from him, he said to them," quote, "I am a jealous God, and no other gods exist beside me," unquote. Now, it's an interesting thing to say, right? Because if, in fact, he is jealous, this would imply that somewhere deep inside himself, he believes there are other gods that people could worship or revere and move away from him. That's why he's jealous. But of course, since he's also a liar and much in denial, and he's also trying to persuade the angels, he's going to, of course, say, "And no other gods exist beside me." But of course, anyone that is falling into the trap of following after the Demi-urge's paradigm, then, they'll likely fall into what he has to say. They'll likely be persuaded and convinced and tricked into what he's saying. But his proclamation indicated to the angels who dwelled with him that another God does exist, right? For if there were not another God who exists, of whom would he be jealous? So now the aeons, when they had come from the Demi-urge, they came into through the firmament, known as the waters, that separate the pleroma from the seventh heaven. So there's the eighth and ninth heaven, that is the intermediary between the seventh heaven, where the Demi-urge resides and that he's ignorant of, and the waters between those, where the soul resides, the soul beings reside. And that is the realm between the firmaments, the heavenly firmament and the pleroma. The waters exist. When you go through that, you go to a type of amnesia or sleep into this realm. That's why we don't recall when our souls get cycled back. We go back into the fleshly body and goes back into the dirt. The soul goes into heaven for judgment and karma. The spirit goes back to the pleroma. If the karma says it wants to return to the flesh realm, then the spirit goes back through the water from the pleroma, enters into the soul again, and gets embodied, and then comes into a flesh form through the process of birth in the womb of the mother, the fleshly mother here on earth, or any other perhaps planet that may exist that one may incarnate into. More than likely, much like a traveler, we're going to be more likely to come back to what we're familiar with. So most likely you're going to come back to earth. My guess is very highly likely, because it's like a individual goes on trips and comes back home. So this is what's familiar to these soul bodies. This is the incarnation that we're experiencing as human beings. Anyway, it continues. The mother began to wonder. This is Sophia. She understood her deficiency when the brightness of her light was diminished. What it's saying here is that she understands that there's no way that she's ever going to be able to fully experience the true Father. So in that way, of course, she's going to feel diminished. And she was darkened because her partner had not been in concord with her. So here's the other part of it. Not only does she understand that she's never going to be able to completely encompass the monad, the ineffable, be able to take that in fully, but also that the Christ, which is her consort, was not able to be part of that experience that she was having. So that brought on her a type of sadness. So think about something that you're experiencing that's awe-inspiring, and perhaps your best friend, or if you're not in a romantic relationship, or your partner, if you're in a romantic relationship, and this is perhaps one of the most astounding things that you have ever experienced up to this point, and your partner is not aware of this and is not necessarily, in agreement with that or not. In fact, perhaps you and your partner are the type that you work really well together, you're very complementary, and you've made all decisions together because jointly you are better than when you are making joints separately. This is the way Sophia is experiencing this. So, of course, she's going to go into a state of sadness. So this is what's referring to. The light was diminished and she was darkened. So this is her state of being. Again, you have to remember that in the pleroma, the aeons are the essence of who they are, their characteristics. The character is who they are. So her character had become diminished and darkened. So she felt small and sad. But I said, Lord, what does it mean? She wondered. And this is John asking Christ. What does it mean she wandered? Now, this, of course, is not referring to any verses that had been mentioned prior in the secret book of John. He's going back to something that was mentioned, according to Christ, in some of the writings of Moses. According to this account of what Christ is sharing with John, Christ is also referring back to something that perhaps Moses had written or said regarding Sophia, where in fact in the canonical text we get none of that. Moses never even mentions, much less Sophia. Now, he smiled and said, do not think it means as Moses said, upon the waters. And here's the thing, because remember I had said that there's the waters that separates the firmament, the upper firmament from the lower firmament. Now, Christ is essentially saying that maybe John had been taught. Sophia was wandering in that place between the heavens and the pleroma. And that's where she was wandering. Christ is clarifying, no, that's not what happened. And so he's going to tell us what really happened. But in fact, when she saw the evil which had happened, and again, remember evil, you can't think of it in terms of orthodox understanding of evil. Evil is merely a consequence of some action that you take that results in dividing a left and a right, comes from that outcome of whatever it is you're doing. So it creates division, an evening up of the left and the right, or the day and the night, so forth and so forth. That's what evil basically means from the perspective of Gnostic text. It's not according to the Orthodox, where she did something that was bad and malicious and horrible, but it's an outcome. It's a result of something that she did, and that result is evil. When she saw the evil which had happened, so this is again a consequence of what she had done, an effect of the cause that she set forth, and the theft which her offspring had committed, and here it's referring to the Demi-urge had stolen light, all the angels that he created. He didn't share that light. So it's a type of thievery. All the light prior had been shared with all the aeons, from the monad, the true father, the mother. This is the first time within existence that light was being hoarded. And so this is a type of thievery from her perspective, which her offspring had committed. She repented. So in other words, she's saying to herself, what can I do now? I need to do something not going the way it should be going. I need to figure a way to bring this back, to repay what I've done. And she was overcome forgetfulness and darkness of ignorance. So the moment that she was doing that, or the moment she repented, instantly manifested the outcome of what it would take for repentance to be set into action. And that is, she would have to go into forgetfulness, go into ignorance. So why was that necessary? It was necessary in that she would have to go into the realm of darkness to retrieve the light that was stolen from her from the Demi-urge, who hoarded it. That's what it means when she had to go into forgetfulness, ignorance, and darkness. This is the realm of forgetfulness, darkness, and ignorance. Everything from the seventh heaven down is the darkness, the realm of darkness, and ignorance, and forgetfulness. In other words, so she wasn't in the realm below the seventh heaven. She actually went down of her own accord. You have to remember, nobody had punished her at this point. No mother, father didn't punish her. Christ, her consort, was not aware of this, nor were all the other aeons aware of what she was doing. So this is something she did of her own account. This is a type of sacrifice. She took a chance, took a risk to go into forgetfulness, to retrieve the light, and she began to be ashamed. Now here is something, again, you have to remember that having emotions is not a bad thing, as long as it's self-generated within yourself. Now, no one else is doing that. No one's doing this to her. No one is requiring that she be ashamed and guilty and wretched. God's not requiring that of her. Her consort's not requiring it of her. None of the aeons are requiring it of her. This is something that she has created for herself as a way to redeem herself, to clear her conscience. The beginning of that process for her is to go into darkness and forgetfulness, and then to follow that up with shame. It's an understanding within yourself that something you've done that you feel responsible for, accountable for, that you feel as though it was a mistake, and you're somewhat embarrassed about it, essentially. This is what this means. So she feels embarrassed about the fact that she wanted to understand the ineffable, and now she got it, and that maybe she took on a lot more than she was ever imagining. Perhaps it was a moment of sort of looking in the mirror and saying to herself, what a foolish entity I am to think I could contain the infinite ineffable. That's just beyond anything. That was like a moment that came to her, like, wow, this was much bigger than I could have ever imagined. She did not dare to return, but she was in motion. She was moved, and she was not going to be at rest until such time that this was rectified. So this is what it means is, this movement is the wandering, and the wandering is the beginning of that feeling of restlessness that is being projected outward into the universe, into all human beings. There's a constant feeling of restlessness, of trying to understand, and always trying to go out further with more discoveries, and trying to understand God, and always wandering forth, never feeling like we're completely home. Even here on planet Earth, it feels like almost like an isolated island. It's just one little planet, alienated from this huge space, right? So even that feels almost not only alien, it's alienated, but it feels alien to be here. It feels, something about it feels unanswered, right? It's not rectified. So it creates in all human beings the question, what is this all about? What does this mean? How did this happen? Why do I have a consciousness? Why do I have an awareness? That's the movement that's being referred to here in all of us, the wandering within us that moves us to want to project outward and to make new discoveries, create new things, always trying to find more and more answers to why things are what they are. Okay, this is what this manifests. This is the beginning of the redemptive process, the beginning of going back to the pleroma. But this is something not being cast on her by God, nor by her consort or other aeons. Nobody's shaming her. Nobody's requiring this of her. This is something she herself did of her own account. Her will set forth in motion a type of wandering so that it could find a way to forgive itself. So this is not something that the God did or required of her, but something she required for herself. That's what we have to understand. Now, the next says, the arrogant one had gotten a power from his mother, and the arrogant one, of course, is of course the Demi-urge. For he was ignorant, thinking that no one existed except his mother alone. And seeing the multitude of the angels whom he had created, he then exalted himself over them. Of course, he has the light, and he only gave them fire. And when the mother understood that the garment of darkness was not perfect, in other words, again, not complete, just the beginning of this, she had a lot of work ahead of her, she then understood that her partner had not been in concord with her. She repented with great weeping. Of course, she already knew that her consort was not doing this with her, so of course she already knew that. So why is it repeating it here? And why now is she moved? Because it's that moment that it really hits her, like it hits home, like, well, I'm experiencing all of this alone now, and I have to do this by myself. This is the first time that she's had to figure this out on her own, and she feels ashamed, and she doesn't want to get her consort involved. And so there's a type of loneliness that just envelopes her and takes her over, and it overwhelms her, and so she starts to weep. And the entreaty of her repentance was heard, and all the fullness praised the invisible virginal spirit on her behalf. The monad, we're not talking about the mother-father here, but the monad, the invisible virginal spirit, which goes all the way through the mother-father back to the beginning of everything, that's the monad, was moved by her weeping. So it resounded and back to the monad. So her plead was made from the essence of her being, the most sacred part of herself that we all carry, which is the God within us, was moved. And so the Holy Spirit poured over her something from their entire fullness. So they were moved to pour this essence into her. And we're going to see what this essence is. For her partner did not come to her by himself, but it was through the fullness that he came to her in order that he might correct her deficiency. So what does the monad do when he finally gets the understanding of the consequence of what Sophia set forth? Does the monad react in anger? No. Does the monad react in dismay, and does he get jealous or wrathful? None of that. The monad, the ineffable God in the pleroma, does the very opposite of that. He sees that Sophia is weeping and feeling utterly empty and alone. The insides of her are tearing up, and completely like a void is in her of what she's done. And what does the monad do? He fills her up. He completely just fills her up with his essence. And not only that, this is the way in which he does it, because he knows that what has resulted from her action is going to be humankind being then enticed into this realm, known as the matrix, the kanoma. So right there he sets forth a rectification. He says, for her partner did not come to her by himself, but it was through the fullness that he came to her in order that he might correct her deficiency. The monad, the true mother-father, didn't turn to Christ and complain to Christ. Well, I have to tell you something. Your consort did this and did it without your consent. No. In fact, it said, you need to go to her. You need to console her. You need to rectify it. Help her rectify this. This is what they do. For her partner did not come to her by himself, but it was through the fullness that he came to her in order that he might correct her deficiency. And deficiency is again referring to that emptiness, that utter mourning that she's going through, the weeping, and the outcome of what she set forth. And so the Christ comes to her to restore balance with her. He doesn't come to her and say, well, I'm not going to forgive you until you ask for forgiveness. None of that. He instantly recognizes what she did and knows why she did what she did. He knows her well. She knows she's wisdom. See, and so he doesn't have any feelings of disappointment or dismay or resentment or needing to retaliate in any way. He's moved instead to come to her and to help restore the deficiency within her. Yet even so, she was not conveyed to her own aeon. So in other words, she couldn't accept that her consort was going to completely just embrace her. She couldn't accept that. This is how much she was carrying this burden with her, but was placed above her child so that she might dwell in the ninth until she corrects her deficiency. So in other words, she was going to stay there in that realm, in the ninth realm. And this is the ninth realm that is the realm that is just prior to the pleroma, which is the eternal realm. She came back some. She didn't stay with the Demi-urge in the seventh realm. She went through the eighth realm and back to the ninth realm. That's where the children of the seed of Seth, and that's where she resided. And she's not going to return back to the perfect realm until this was rectified. Verse 15, and a voice came from the exalted heavenly aeon. The humans exists and the child of the human. So what is it referring to here? What does it mean here? The child of the human. Here it's capitalized. It says a voice came from the exalted heavenly aeon, saying the humans exists and the child of the human. What it's saying here is that human beings now, the flesh human, they exist in the realm now. They're going to be made flesh. This is a premonition of things. This is telling what's going to happen here. He already knows what the Yeldabaoth is going to set forth. In addition to that, and the child of the human. Who is the child of the human? Well, that's the Christ that's going to come to earth. Now, there are some Gnostics that do not believe the story, one of them being the followers of Marcion, who is even then questionably whether he was actually a Gnostic leader. But some Gnostics believe that there was no child of Christ. That was a made-up story. There are others that do believe there was actually a child of Christ, the whole nativity story, so forth and so on. I'm one of those that is inclined to believe there was a child of Christ. There was a Mother Mary, so forth and so on. And there are many reasons why I believe this, and one of them being here. The human exists and the child of the human, period. And the next one says, Yaldabaoth heard it, but he thought that the voice had come from his mother, did not understand where it came from. So this is a kind of warning to Yaldabaoth. We're on to you. We know what you're doing. Sort of warning him, hey, we're going to bring the child of Christ here down to redeem the deficiency that Sophia set forth. He doesn't really know what to make of it. He doesn't know whether to freak out or anything. He just thinks the mother's saying this. And the holy and perfect mother father, the perfect pronoia, the image of the invisible, who is the father of the all, in whom the all came into being, the first human, taught them by revealing his likeness in a male model. And this is the Christ, the male model, which is not the actual Christ, the aeon, but a likeness in the body of Jesus that's to come. The aeon of the chief ruler trembled all over. Now he's kind of getting this, like, okay, you're going to actually have someone kind of come against me, is what you're saying. This frightens him. And the foundations of the abyss quaked. And upon the waters which dwelled under the matter, there's waters that's also separating the heavens, the seventh heavens, all the heavens, down to the third, I think it's the fourth heaven. There's another firmament. Between that, there's waters, and then there's the lower underworld, which is the third, second, and first realm. The earth resides in the third realm. So that portion, also, the chief ruler, that's the Demi-urge, he gets moved, and when he gets moved, he began to get shaken. The underside was illumined by the appearance of his image, which had been revealed. Now the underrealm is aware of his existence. This is the beginning of awakening of the God known as Jehovah on earth, and there's many other permutations of gods, Muslim gods, so forth and so on, which they really worship the same God, Jehovah. But this is the beginning of seeing one of the faces of Jehovah. And when all the authorities and the chief rulers stared on the water, they saw the region below which was shining, and by the light they saw the model of the image upon the water. So in other words, the Demi-urge saw mankind, the perfect human being, on the reflection being coming through the water, where humankind was intended to start, to be known as perfect, and to go through all the different realms, all the way up through the seventh, eighth, ninth, so forth, and back to the pleroma. This was to be done from the beginning perfectly, with no intrusion by the Demi-urge and his minions and his devices. And he said to the authorities who dwell with him, come, let us create a human according to the image of God and according to our likeness, so that his image might illuminate us. Now this is one of the most astounding sentences you're going to get in the Sacred Book of John for many, many reasons, because it's telling you why the Demi-urge needs human beings. It's telling you that they're trying to understand, just like we are, why he's there. He doesn't know why he's there. He doesn't know why he exists. He doesn't understand what it all means either. He's just doing the best he can with what he's got. He understands that the only way he's going to get that is through human being. And he also understands that without the human beings, the light that sustained this universe, that gives it life, is not going to be able to be sustained. It's going to collapse, and he's going to be the God of nothing. So each one of us are, in fact, as the Matrix movie suggests, batteries. We are the ones that project the universe into existence through our light. The physical realm is merely the entrapment. It's merely the material substance that was created by the Demi-urge and his minions to keep us here. That's what he's doing. And we're going to see that here in a second. And so what did they do in response to this? Knowing that they couldn't let humans escape, and they created using the power from each of them according to the characteristics which they had been given. So in other words, he knew that each one of us were a piece of God, and he was going to use that to make himself Lord and to keep us here. But in order to do that, how would he do that? He was going to use us to do it, along with his angels or his demons. And each one of the authorities supplied for the human soul a characteristic corresponding to model the image which he had seen. Now this is where the soul gets created first. The reason why he creates a soul, the Demi-urge is very clever. So you understand, he is the child of one of the aeons, which is very close to Christ and God. So he's very immensely intelligent, beyond Einstein times like 10,000 million. So he's very smart. He knows what he's doing. He knows that he has to create a bridge between the spiritual realm and the physical realm, because that bridge is what's going to be needed for the light to be able to be siphoned into this realm in order to sustain it. He's not going to be able to force the light to continue in this realm, because it's going to diminish through time and eventually evaporate. So what is he going to do? He's going to use the soul, a bridgeway, to basically steal the light from the pleroma to sustain this universe. That's what he's doing. And so each one of the authorities supplied for the humans a soul, a characteristic corresponding to the model of the image which he had seen. He created a real being in accordance with the likeness of the perfect first human. He knows that he can't create personalities. He can't create characters. He can't create spirit beings, which that's what spirit beings are. The essence of our being is not our bodies or our soul, but it is our personalities, our character. He can't make those. He has to make a way in which, like bodysuits that fit each one of our personalities and characters. So that's what he's doing now. He's going to create some kind of mock-up or frame called a soul, and then put flesh around that soul to both contain the spirit, but also make it seem familiar to us. So you're going to create it as close a proximity so that we get tricked in believing that that's who we are, our body and our soul, because it seems familiar to us. It seems this is who we are, because he's going to make it as close as possible to each one of us that it tricks us into believing it's the real thing. Essentially, that's counterfeit. He created a real being in accordance with the likeness of the perfect first human. And it's referring to the first human as being all of us, the perfect first human. And they said, let us call him Adam. And Adam comes from the Hebrew word meaning essentially the dirty earth, the red soil of the earth, in order that his name might become a power of the light for us. So it's telling you that even though he had gnosis in him, he didn't know how to make contact with it. He didn't know how to use it. In fact, he hoarded it. See, you remember he hoarded it. And that's what Christ always talks about, not to, put a cloth over a lamp or a candle. It's not the purpose of a candle, right? But the purpose is to shine your light forth, but then to share it. But the Demi-urge didn't know how to do this. He didn't know how to share that light. And so as a result, this realm was dark. And the powers began their work. The first one, goodness, created a bone soul. The second one, paranoia, created a sinew soul. And that's the cartilages and connections between the flesh and the bone. The third one, divinity, made a flesh soul. The fourth one, lordship, made a marrow soul. The fifth, kingdom, made a blood soul. The sixth one, envy, created a skin soul. The seventh, understanding, created a hair soul. The multitude of the angels stood before him. They received the seven substances of the soul from the powers so that they might create the harmony of the parts and the harmony of the limbs and the proper combination of each of the parts. So why is this called souls and not flesh? There are 7 parts to the soul, is what's being said here. And flesh is just one of those parts. The skin is one of those parts. The body is one of those parts. They all work together, and they all have their rulership over them. Each of the 7 angels created by the Demi-urge, the 7 darknesses, or the 7 forms. So the multitude of angels stood before him. They received the 7 substances of the souls from the powers, so that they might create the harmony of the parts and the harmony of the limbs and the proper combination of each of the parts. The first began to create starting from the head. Etropoth, Abron, created its head. And Etra essentially comes from that same word we get inner part of ourselves, or entryway. So the important thing to know about each of these words, they are words that are used in medicine and body parts, so forth and so on, but I'm not a doctor, and even doctors today, a lot of these wouldn't recognize these words because they're words that are angels and demons, that use. Even humans don't use these words, but they are plays on those words. One example is the word Stroth created the brain, that we get words like meningia, which is the membrane that is near the brain, so things like that. And then astrochimen, which you get the word like someone has a stigma, for example. The right eye might drift to the right. They might call it a stigma, for example. So forth and so on. I'm not going to read each one of these. You can go read them yourself. But the point here is that each one of these angels or demons, this is the part of the body that they have domain over to create, because they're specialized in that part of the body. Supposedly, some people, some practitioners of witchcraft, magic, so forth and so on, pagans or other people believe in conjuring up dark spirits, might pray to these angels if they have parts of the body they have problems with, like the stomach. They might pray to Sinapham, which is the one that created the abdomen. Understand that if you're going to do that, there's going to be a price that you have to pay, essentially. So I don't encourage you to go down that path. So it continues and on it goes and explains each one of these. And then we go down here to the last part of verse 16. It says, and 7 were appointed over all of these. These are the ones that we mentioned prior, the leaders of these packs: Athoth, Armes, Kalila, Yabel, Sabaoth, Cain, Abel. And then verse 17 continues, and those who animate the parts are according to two parts, the head, so forth and so on, the neck, the right shoulder, the left, the chest. And these, again, I'm not going to try to pronounce each one of these. They're very foreign to every language on earth, really. They're very difficult to say. So on and on it goes, and then it near here would pick up 7, have power over all of these. Michael, Auriel, Asmindus, Saphosatal, Aramurum, Richram, Amiorps. And again, I can't guarantee I'm pronouncing these correctly. And those who are over the senses, Archendecta, and the one over perception, Ditharbathus, and the one over imagination, Ouma, and the one over assent, Aeturum, and the one over the whole impulse, Achiatum, and the one over the whole impulse, Ryaramanico. And the source of these demons who are in the whole body is fixed as 4: heat, cold, wetness, dryness. Now, demons are the ones that are going to animate things. So this is why demons are used. And they're going to animate it through these 4 states of energy: heat, coldness, wetness, and dryness. Think of the word demonstration. When somebody's doing a demonstration, they're activated, or they're presenting something and illustrating something in action through the body. So this is what the demons do. So when people talk about demons possessing bodies and they get animated, like ridiculously animated or unnaturally animated, this is the domain of the demons, is to animate things, animate bodies. This is how they do it, through these 4 sources of animation: heat, cold, wetness, dryness. And the mother of them all is matter, from which we get the word mother, by the way, matter. The one who rules over the heat, Philoxpha. The one who rules over the cold, Ororothos. The one who rules over what is dry, Irimako. The one who rules over the wetness, Arthuro. The mother of these all, Anorthocrase, who is limitless, stands in their midst, and she mixes with them all. And truly she is matter, for they are nourished by her. So matter is the substance of everything. It's called the mother. We get the word matter, mother. Mare, which means sea and ocean. This is where everything is being created in the physical realm, is through water. Water first, and then things come out of the water. This is the process of evolution. This is also the child, when the mother breaks the water and the child comes forth. Ephimemphi is the one who belongs to pleasure. Yoko is the one who belongs to desire. Nin Intolphany is the one who belongs to grief. Bleomen is the one who belongs to fear. The mother of them all is Esthenus Ouch Ipito. The passions come into being from these 4 demons. So the passions and the animations, or the demonstrations of the bodies, which are not really being moved by the spirit unless the spirit's moving it, are the passions and the fears and the imagination, impulses, senses, perceptions, all those things that were mentioned prior. The 7 powers are what moves flesh humans. Perception, one of them. The 5 senses that move human beings. Imagination, assent. In other words, this is the word. This is getting approval from other people around you. That's assent, or disapproval. That's another thing that moves humans. Impulse, that's the urge that's being moved in humans. And it's done through the demonstration of all of those. It's done through heat, cold, wetness, dryness, and those through different bodily fluids or different expressions, of moving toward heat or toward cold, so forth and so on. And then the other ones that we mentioned were fear is another one, passions. And then it says the passions come into being from these 4 demons: from grief, envy, jealousy, suffering, trouble, pain, heartlessness, anxiety, mourning, and the rest. And from pleasure comes much wickedness and empty boasting and similar things. From desire comes anger, wrath, bitterness, bitter yearning, insatiable greed, and similar things. From fear comes panic, flattery, anguish, shame. These all resemble virtues as well as vices. The insight into their true character is Anoro, who is the head of the material soul, which dwells with the 7 senses, Ouch Epto. So the soul is the part where we begin to awaken toward gnosis. So that's the part that you understand the true character of these demons that are ruling you, and with all these different characteristics. So you have any of these characteristics, it's not coming from the true Father. It's coming from the Demi-urge and all of its minions. And remember what I said, it's these characteristics that are the actual aeons or angels. Whenever these emotions or characteristics are being demonstrated, the demon is there with you. It's actually there. That demon is present. So it is not confounded by time and space. It can be wherever it wants. And it's going to be alive. It's feeding off your energy, what I'm basically telling you. It's using your light. Then it carries that energy back to the demiurge. So it kind of does a rationing. It's like, okay, I get some to feed on, and then I bring back to the demiurge. And this is why we talk about Jehovah wanting flesh, sacrifices, and things like that, because it wants the suffering coming off of that animal, and it wants the human being to be subjugated to worship and be enraptured by, through judgment, by the demiurge. This is the number of the angels. Altogether they are 365. And again, this is a play on 365 days of the year. They all labored on it until, part by part, the psychic and material body was completed. Now others, whom I have not mentioned to you, rule over the rest. If you want to know about them, it is written in the book of Zoroaster. So this, of course, is referring to the Zoroastrian religion. This is another group of people that were persecuted for telling the truth through time. And all the angels and demons labored until they had created the psychic body, and that's the soul body. All those emotions that was talked about, that's referring to the soul. The expression of the physical self is through the soul. The soul can either take you to hell, which is reincarnating back into the flesh realm eternally, or it can take you back as a bridgeway to the pleroma. So that's the way it's described. If you have any questions on any of that, we're going to pick up on verse number 18 next video. The main point to get from what was just read is not necessarily trying to pronounce each one of these correctly, as it's going to be a task for you to do that, but it's to understand that the demiurge is not sharing his light, and so he creates the soul by which he can siphon the light to sustain this universe, to keep it alive. He's also doing that through humans. The way he's siphoning it is because, remember, the pleroma exists in all of us. He's using the souls within each one of us and creating terror and fear and those things so that we light up like a Christmas tree. And he's using that light to sustain this realm. Without that light, this realm would collapse. It would die. The fire is not what is the light. So when you're getting the sun burning or planets that are reflecting light from the sun, that is not the essence of God. What's the essence of God is what's being burnt, and that essence shining forth. The fire isn't the light. The fire is merely the burning of. It's one of those states, the demon juice, which is heat. That's all that is. And then the demon can also use cold, and it can use moisture, or it can use dryness as well. But those are not God. Those are machinations, or the tools of those demons, you see. And what it's doing is it's using those tools so that light can be released into this realm, in order that this realm might be sustained. That energy, it wants to keep that energy here. It wants to keep that light here. So it's doing it through bodies. The way to get free from that is not to play into those demons and demonstrate those kinds of emotions that were mentioned in this. So that's what you want to study. The words help you. If it helps you to know each one of the demon names or each one of the angels' names, that's fine. You can do that. But I would encourage you to stay away from dark magic, because there's karma in the universe and it will come back, and there's a price to pay. Remember, the demiurge never gives you anything for free. It always requires something back from you. The only one that ever gives you anything for free is the monad, the true mother, father, the ineffable. That light is free and always will be. But anything in this realm is not free. That's what you have to remember. This is the realm of sacrifice and death and mayhem. So it's constantly burning things out. So it has to have things come back to this realm, so it can burn it out again, burn it again, burn it again. And so that's what's creating these bodies, to captivate as prisoners the spirit. And the soul is there to trick you into thinking the soul is the spirit, because it's the facsimile of who you are. It's a counterfeit impression of the spirit. So the demiurge recognized each one of us when it saw the light in the 3 realms below him, and he was able to create all the humans just based on that. When he got flared up by his fear, that in that moment he created all the humans based upon his understanding of each one of our personalities and our characters, our name. In other words, he kind of recognized our name and spelled them as close as he could to each one of us, so that we would get tricked into believing that's who we are, when in fact we're not our body or our soul, but we are our spirit. Okay, so that's where I'm going to leave it, and the next video we'll pick up on verse number 18. Blessed day.